Johann Wolfgang von Goethe said, music is liquid architecture, and architecture is frozen music. I think that's the perfect quote to start off on for the guest that we have today. His name is Lewis Parker. He's an artist with a keen interest in the science and mysteries of sound and frequency. He's a music producer and has amazing videos on Instagram called Fundamental Frequency. You'll be educated and generally amazed at the short, digestible downloads he provides on the power of music and sound on the world of matter. I've been following him for a while before I found out that he was actually following my work as well. So without further ado, let's get Lewis Parker in here on the Ben Stewart podcast. My man, Lewis, how you doing today?
I'm good, thanks, Ben. Thanks for the awesome intro, man. That was cool.
Yeah, man. Where are you hailing from today?
I am in Australia. I live about an hour north of Sydney. I live in a coastal town. It's beautiful. It's near the beach. It's sunny most of the time. It's been raining a lot, which we were just talking about.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, it's a beautiful place here. I'm very lucky.
That's cool, man. Yeah, we got a lot to talk about today. The topics are roughly around music and sound, which people who've been following my work for quite some time know that I'm a nerd about. Not just the effects on matter itself, but also psychology, consciousness, and really just I love getting into both the science of it and the mysteries of it because they seem to be getting closer these days. But I wanted to start with something simple for the audience, which is something that you recommended I lead with, which is let's just define sound. So how do you define sound?
Sure. So in my research, I've come across two definitions of sound. There's one definition of sound which refers to the audible hearing range of sound that we perceive as human beings, which is between 20 to 20,000 hertz. So that is like the spectrum of our hearing, which all our music exists within, that we can perceive. So that's the first sort of that's the first description of sound. The second one would be, in a scientific sense, people refer to sound as all waveforms. So that includes electromagnetism, electricity, any sort of like radiant energy. Sound is defined as a mechanical radiant energy that is longitudinal waves, right? That moves through a medium. And also, like in my research of looking at the nature of sound, we've got the basis of sound, the way we perceive sound wrong. We look at it as a wave, but when we look at a wave, imagine a waveform, that is actually incorrect of how the reality of sound. So that's the way we graph sound in a 2D sense, but sound is three-dimensional. It moves in holographic bubbles, which are emanating. So as I'm speaking, they're emanating out of my mouth right now, and you're perceiving them on the other end. Yeah, so I'll leave it there, and I'd love to hear your comment on that, man.
Well, I dig that. This actually, like, I almost wish we could visualize sound more.
Yes.
Because like in that three-dimensional way, what was it? There's in Donnie Darko, there was that kind of like fluid like bubble coming from the heart, leading from the heart. Also in the Matrix, when the bullets are flying by, you see the warping of the air around there. I imagine it must have some cymatic geometry to it. Maybe maybe it would be easier seeing this underwater or represented as, being seen underwater. But that's interesting that you mentioned, because we do really, I know that for me, I even get caught in this idea that, sound is this wave, and it's like lines of waves that just shoot out in all directions. And it's the same with energy. What's energy? Oh, it's just waves. It's just vibration, which are lines that shoot out in all directions. Yeah. And it makes me wonder, because you hear that energy can't be created or destroyed, it just changes form. And I often think like, well, what does that mean about sound? Because we do produce sound, but we produce sound from mechanical motions. And this is how I nerd out on it. I try and make analogies of it so I can better understand it. But before we go full on nerd with it, I want to understand like what got you into the world of sound, the world of frequencies. What turned you on to this as being something that, hey, I'm going to talk about this and almost primarily this?
Yeah, so that could turn into a very long story, but I can just sort of like summarize it into a neat package. And please, if I'm waffling on too much, just pull me up. So I got into music when I was a kid. I come from quite a musical family on my mother's side. My grandfather was actually a very well-known pianist in Sydney area, and he started a major jazz festival in Sydney, which still runs today. He passed away in 2007, but his jazz festival is still going, which is now run by my auntie. And then my uncle is like quite a famous jazz saxophonist, and he actually lives in the US, and he is a professor of jazz music at San Francisco State University. So there is this like rich sort of like musical family on one side, but I kind of was disconnected from that a little bit. Like my mother is musical, but she could sing and she's got good pitch, but she's not really like a musician. But I was always encouraged to play music, right, via that influence, even though my uncle lived overseas. So, you know, first instrument I played was like saxophone or something, and I didn't really gel with it. And then I got given a guitar at Christmas when I was about 10. And that was when it clicked. You know, all of a sudden music made sense to me. I love guitar and I love guitar music. So yeah, and as a young, you know, boy going into teenage years after that, it just became cooler, right? Like people loved that you could play guitar, and I loved that I could play guitar. I would get lost for hours just, you know, jamming out by myself. And then I discovered I could play with other people, and that's when it really was cemented, right? In the love of live music, playing together. There's nothing like it. I know you would understand that experience. It's like when it all comes together and you're all like just speaking this language that is, you know, it's not words, it's feeling, and it's music, right?
Yeah, just the combination. You know, I actually, may sound weird, but I went onto Spotify and I turned on my old album, the very last album that my band Hyrosonic did, which that name was very interesting because right before I really got deep into these kinds of topics, Hyro meaning sacred, and sonic vibrations, and you know, so I turned it back on. What I was remembering was like, man, this, like, for one, I was really into rock, but there was something in the combination of having a group of people making all these sonic frequencies that just happen to make sense together.
Yes.
You know, they follow the same rhythm and they have melodic, you know, relational orientation with one another. And then there's this element of doing it in front of other people, whether it's just a small group of people who enjoy music or an entire, we played Lollapalooza and there was thousands upon thousands of people. And there's just this feeling, especially when you get into the pocket and you realize that it's bigger than just, whoa, I'm at a concert. You know, it's when you get swept away by it and there's no like credit given to like, I like that guy or that gal. And it's more or less just like, whoa, what is this epiphenomena that's taken over? And it's interesting how the introduction of those who appreciate the music, their natural tendency is to dance around, to move their body, to let the music just move them. And you're right, there's something about producing sound, either with your voice or with instruments that just amplify the sounds that you make, you know, or augment the sounds that you want to make. But there's something, I don't know, man, music has always been my number one love, even in filmmaking, soundtracks, sound design, scoring. It's my number one favorite part of it. So you are a sound producer as well.
Yeah, man. Just to comment on what you just said, I think, you know, in my reflections, what that feeling is or what's happening is, you know, music is another way of explaining natural law. Like you have math, you have philosophy, you have geometry. These are all ways of explaining the same thing. So without knowing it, when people are immersed in music, they're actually like interacting with the fabric of our existence. And it's just this, I think the soul feels this feedback, and the universe as well. You're feeding back into the universe like directly. It's like this beautiful relationship. So I think that's what's being felt and what's been understood on a subconscious level or at a soul level, you know.
Yeah, you're adding beauty, beauty to what is. Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that the fundamental laws and kind of like a language as well. Rudolf Steiner talks about the higher faculties of consciousness. Your communication with the higher faculties of consciousness come about more like art, more like music and symphony. So it won't be just like, oh, I heard the voice of God. The voice of God probably sounds more like a symphony than it does, you know, like Bueller. It doesn't sound like some dry professor. And it made me think when you mentioned like math and geometry, have you heard of the quadrivium?
Ooh, rings a bell, but I can't recall the exact details. Yeah, please.
So the seven liberal arts, it starts with grammar, logic, and rhetoric.
Oh,
And
yes.
so
No, I have
that's the
heard this. Yeah.
trivium. And then the
Yep.
quadrivium is arithmetic. So it's basically like, numbers, and then geometry, numbers in space. And then there's music, numbers in time. And then
Yeah.
there's dance. And that's, music, or it's numbers and geometry in time. I might have butchered that ending, but that's basically the quadrivium is arithmetic, geometry, music, and dance, or cosmos. Some people replace that last one. And these are
Yes.
languages. They really are fundamental.
Yes.
They weren't created by man. They were uncovered and enumerated and categorized by us.
Yes. And the interesting thing about those languages as well, you can't distort the meaning of them. And I think that's the biggest thing is with language nowadays. You can see how language can be used to mislead and deceive people so easily, especially English, which is like the most ineffective language possible. But
I
this
heard
is
Gordo
why
giving a big old
Preach it.
and this is why ancient cultures use sound and dance and music to explain their myths and things like that. This is why they did it, because you can't change the meaning of it once it is what it is.
It's so funny. I don't want to like wax on in this direction too much, but I just did this video on Monday. It was Awaking Infinity, and it was really unique because I really didn't add much to it. It was just me kind of riffing about the story of money, and that most people think of money very dry, very pragmatic. It's numbers. It's like, well, like if this is your problem, on the other side of the equal sign, there's this solution, and you can quantify it. And there's something interesting about it, though. Like, most of the financial sector, if you think about it, it's based off belief. How much
Yes.
belief do people have in the market, in this company, in that company? And something as much as, let's say, back around 2008, Ben Bernanke, just saying a couple words, massive sell-off of stocks, not because these companies all of a sudden got worse, it's because of belief. And the interesting thing that I kind of feel must happen with the way that we look at economics is more musical. Now, Rupert Sheldrake, he had this analog machine that used, and it was used a couple hundred years ago, of just fluids, different fluids that, go from this basin into this basin. And that's how he represents stable economies. And, the main point being is there's something about the story of money that, we think, oh, it's just a matter of numbers, this much incoming, that much outgoing, and how much you want to apportion it. Yeah, you can look at it that way. But I think the reason why older stories and mythologies always have this, as I was talking, Rudolf Steiner said the higher faculties are more like symphonies. It's not just because, oh, well, we might as well put it to a melody, right? It's not just for no reason. It encodes different kinds of information. And it actually tells a deeper story. And I think we're missing the forest for the trees if we're not understanding that. And I'll end with this. There's this guy, Rob Fraboni. He's a legendary music producer. Rolling Stones, Eric Clapton, Bob Dylan, VP of Island Records, mastered all of Bob Marley's stuff. And he was telling me, like, he does mastering. And he was like, a lot of people, they will, to get the whole track, like, if you look at a wave file, you want, some people, they like it like almost like a full bar the entire way. Like all the softer parts are louder and all the louder parts are just peaked and they stop. Yeah. They also compress out all the high tones and the low tones.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like, well, it's inaudible. Why not throw those frequencies away? And he's like, no. These frequencies, even though you think that you're not, just because you're not hearing them, they are actually carrying information of spatial and dimensional information. So kind of like if you recorded it in a room with the Rolling Stones and you squash out all of that, you may not hear the room, but if you don't squash it out, you can almost, and I would say people like Daniel Kish, who taught himself to echolocate, or people who have this higher sensibility, they can almost sense what's happening in the room, almost as if they're there just because of the sound. They're translating more information. So that's
Yes.
why I kind of feel, I at least wanted to say that, because I think that a lot of ways that people look at life is it's just transactional. It's just numerical. It's too pragmatic, and we lose the art of it. So
Yes.
that's kind of my epiphany as of late, that the arts really, they need to make a return in order for us to have our economies and just these basic systems be a bit more harmonious. So there's one thing that I wrote in my notes that I really wanted to make sure that we touched upon, and this might seem like a deviation from what we're talking about, but you did this video on your Instagram, and it was about red blood cell health.
Yes.
And the impact of music on red blood cell health.
Yeah.
There's a very interesting part of that, and we can get into the whole thing right now, but how they were looking at different kinds of music and its impact on red blood cell health. And they also looked at the different tuning, 432, 440, and 444.
Yes.
The thing I found very fascinating was that you would imagine it would, it would seem in this world where like those little micro nuanced differences should make a world of difference, but it seemed like the red blood cell health was improved no matter whether it was tuned to 432, 440, or 444.
Yeah.
What do you make of that?
Well, it's certainly interesting, and I've always been sort of skeptical of the whole like 432, 440, 444 like argument, and it gets all conspiratorial about the Nazis changing it and all that kind of stuff. And I'd love to hear your take.
Explain what we're talking about here too a little bit as you go on.
Yeah, sure. So we're talking about concert pitch. So when we talk about 440 hertz, that is the note, that is an A note, and that is the note that the entire orchestra tunes to, so that they're all tuned and they can all in tune, they all play together in harmony, right?
And hertz is a cycle per second.
It is. So, hertz is the amount of oscillations within a certain, the way we measure it, right? So two different points, the wave goes through the two different points, and we measure the size of the wave, and that is the hertz frequency. So, yeah, man, it's one of those things. But I thought it was really interesting. Like there was no difference between the 440, 432, 444, and 440. They both had effects on red blood cells in reinvigorating the life of them. So, and it was particularly low frequency sound as well that they found had major sort of reinvigorating effects on the red blood cells.
You mentioned in the video the low frequency sounds. Potentially because it mimics the low frequencies of the heartbeat.
That's
and
what
maybe they just vibrate in tissues more deeply than the high frequencies.
Well, yeah, it's definitely they vibrating into tissues more deeply. I don't know if you've ever been at a music festival and you've stood in front of the speaker stack and you felt your whole body vibrating, like your bones shaking. So sub frequencies do have an effect on the physical body, but also you can look at, they use sub frequencies now for in medicine. They use it to break up kidney stones. So they use frequencies between 7 and 12 hertz to break up kidney stones. Apparently that is really painful. It feels like you're being punched in the kidney.
Yeah.
So yeah, man, the whole debate between 440 hertz, 432 hertz, and 444 hertz, it doesn't seem like, I haven't found any scientific research or anything to support that one is better than the other. I think that everything is so case sensitive to the person, and it's all based on the person's perception. So someone might think that 432 hertz sounds better to them, or it might have a better effect on their body, but it's going to be different for everybody, So
yeah, it's interesting, and I wonder if some of it's even the placebo effect. Which, if it works, it works. That's pretty interesting. Also, do you remember anything? Because you mentioned in the video that they went all the way from like classical music, I think, to rock, to hip hop, to spiritually oriented music. Was there any difference in effect between the styles of music?
So they were very careful about how they laid out the evidence, because they didn't want to get themselves into a lawsuit with the companies that own this music or the artists, right? Because if all of a sudden you come out saying that their music is harmful or it doesn't, it's bad for the body, you're going to have massive issues. So they didn't say, but they did say that low frequency music, like dance music, techno, anything with sub, had more of an effect. So
that's wild. I mean, it's like, I know there's so many people out there that I've heard that say, like, it's those monotonous drum beats that, make us militant. And I'm like, interesting, because like that's also very tribal, and what people dance to is those marching drum beats. Not the marching ones with the snare specifically, but just the monotonous low hits. And that also is the ones that make you feel like you want to move your body more. When you're listening to like a flute, you may want to like float around and dance, but there's a different kind of dance that you just feel called to dance when it's the lower frequencies and the consistent bass. Is that the Matrix?
Yeah. I was thinking of that scene. That's cool. That's awesome.
It is really cool.
Yeah, man. It's I think that the low frequency, like drumming, especially like things that are rhythmic and pulsing and have order and repetition. That's again speaking to the way our systems work. So it's like this synergistic relationship between the sound and music and the human system. And I think in those states we go into like a trance, or this is like speaking to shamanism, right? They'll go into a trance through chanting or music or, whatever. So yes, we could be suggestible in those states, because you're going probably into a theta like wave state in the brain, and your subconscious is going to be very programmable in that state. So yeah, I can believe that.
I totally feel it. I mean, if you think about it, I always look at music as, the drummer and the bass. They're kind of laying down the rhythm. It's more about time, whereas the guitar and the vocals, they can even kind of get a little sloppy, sometimes intentionally off time, and it just has this kind of feel to it. And it's more about like it's more. It almost feels like intellectual. You're following it at the top of the spinal column, where like the flute is going. Like if you listen to a flute on its own, it doesn't have to be to a strict metronome. No. If you're playing a djembe and you're not playing it to a strict rhythm, it has to have some kind of order to it for it to make sense. Otherwise, it just sounds like a child's playing it just all over the place. So there is this kind of interesting relationship between the lower notes and the higher notes that I found really interesting. But there's one other thing that I really liked. Low sounds like the heartbeat increased oxygen flow in the and respiration inside the cells. So, I mean, I found that was really rad. There was another video that you were showing, I think this might have been John Stewart Reed, where taking a look at this cymatic imprint of healthy cells versus cancerous cells. And it seemed like the cymatic imprint, and for those who maybe don't understand what that means, that just means frequency has an effect on matter, and if you put it into something like a cymoscope, which is just a drop of water, or a little more than a drop, and a microscope, that in that piece of water, as it vibrates, it will create a symmetrical, hopefully if it's a true tone, it'll create some kind of geometry. And by the images that I saw in that video, healthy cells have more geometry and symmetry to them, whereas the cancerous cells were kind of warped and they had less symmetry. And it almost brings me back to when you say, like the Dr. Emoto, when you say like, I love you, or kind things to water, and you crystallize it, I tend to think that there's some merit to it. I've done my own experiments, but I also did it kind of like not in the exact same size beakers with rice water and stuff like that. But it seems like the droplets of water will either get some hexagonal shape to them with a proper frequency, a healthy cell's frequency, and a cancerous cell doesn't have the same kind of frequency emanating from it as well. And so, like, I'm curious your thoughts on that and just the whole world of using sound as medicine. What are your thoughts on using sound as medicine and how that operates?
Yeah, this is a massive topic to tackle, but to start with, where the cancer cell research and the sound of cells, that's a really interesting place. So that experiment that you're referring to was done by a scientist named James Jimsewski. I think he's from like Texas or something like that. I'm not exactly sure, but I think he works with Rutgers University, wherever that is. But so the experiment that he did, a couple of experiments. That experiment particularly was they looked at the respiratory sound of cells. So cells actually breathing, they're taking in nutrients from their environment, and they do this in like a pulsing fashion, which emanates a sound. So when they were able to blow up that sound, they found it was actually within the audible hearing range, which is an amazing discovery. So, okay, we can actually hear what cells sound like. And then they called upon John Stewart Reed, who he's not the inventor of the cymoscope, but he's definitely like pioneered the new version of the cymoscope. Like he's made it a lot better. He's made it a lot more reliable. And yeah, so they called him, they took these respiratory sounds of the cells and they blew them up, and they were able to see what a healthy cell looks like versus a cancerous cell. And yes, you were right. So the healthy cell had symmetrical geometry, and the cancer cell had very warped and like sort of out of alignment geometry, which suggests there's distortion there, right? So you touched on pure tones before. When we talk about a pure tone, it's like, this is why I called fundamental frequency, because like you have one pure tone, it might be 440 hertz like we talked about before, but it has natural overtones that occur. So the next one up is you double it, so it's 880, it goes up like that. And they're the natural overtones, and you can have infinite overtones. But there's like there's a natural order and thing that just naturally occurs. But I think there's something that happens along the way where that gets distorted. The sound gets distorted, and that's an indication that there is illness or disharmony in the system. And the basis of sound therapy is actually helping the body recognize its pure tone. That's how I would sort of summarize it. The sound itself is not so much like doing anything to the physiology to heal it. The body, you're born perfect. The body has the power to heal itself, and you're just reminding it of what it should sound like, if that makes sense.
That's exactly what,
interesting.
If I'm playing guitar and I want to tune it off a piano, that's all the piano is doing for me, is reminding me what that sounds like so I can match it with my ear. That's really fascinating. So it's entrainment, it sounds like, with the body is, and maybe entrainment is not the right word. It's referencing.
And the body is so intelligent, and it reorganizes itself to once it hears what it should sound like. And we can get into like the science of that. There's another experiment I just want to touch on that I think James did as well, where they actually took cells, and they had two cells. One was control, obviously, so nothing, and then the other one was they placed under electron microscope, they placed acid near it, not on the cell, but near the cell. And they found that the cell was registering a higher pitch in response to being near the acid. So it was actually alarmed by the sound by the acid being near it. So it's registering distress. It means it's conscious as well. It means it's like got intelligence. But so that also indicates that when cells are under stress, they have a higher pitch. And the way you would correct that is by reminding them of what their pitch should be.
Whoa. So I want to rewind just a little bit to what you were calling conscious. The water itself, the frequency, or what?
Well, I'm referring to the cell being conscious. Like the cell.
Okay, yeah.
The cell is conscious of the fact that it's in danger, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's more anecdotal in my memory than the exact study, but the studies of testing the stress responses of plants, and the experimenter who was going to light one of the leaves on fire with a lighter, before even striking the lighter and hitting the flame to the leaf, the plant was already giving off a distress signal.
Yeah.
And sometimes I don't know what to make of these things, because there are, anomalies that I've heard three different people explain in different ways of retrograde causality in quantum entanglement, where it's like, wait a minute, is like the present affecting the past, or is that just the way that we decode how things play out? It's hard to really, and I don't even want to go off into that rabbit hole, but that's super interesting that the acid maybe is even producing that higher pitch frequency. That's what the cell was registering, and it was giving off because it was in its environment. It was giving off a stress response.
Yeah, that's right. Look, I'm not saying that. Yeah, it's hard to say exactly what's going on, like you were saying, but yeah, it seems that way. And that's John Stewart Reed talks about that. He was saying that the cell is registering alarm in response to being near the acid. And in the essence, or referencing the previous experiment that we talked about with the geometry of the cancer cell versus the healthy cell. Always with the cancerous cell, they found that the pitch was higher in tone.
That's interesting. That is really interesting. The pitch is higher in tone with the cancer cell.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what to make of that, but that's. I mean, even for the audience, it's curious. These are definitely like little aha like pieces of information you got to store away. And for the audience, go ahead before I launch in.
Well, I think if you want to take anything away from those experiments, it's that the cymoscope can be used as a great diagnostic tool for understanding, cancerous cells, and they hypothesize that they can use, and then this has been done before, they can use the sound of the cell to help destroy and eradicate cancer cells. It's been done before. They can basically, to destroy the structure of the cell, you just play the same frequency back to it at a higher amplitude, and it can't hold the amount of resonance anymore, and it will just destroy.
Right, all the way back to Royal Raymond Rife, this concept was alive.
Yes.
What's interesting, I'll just throw this out there. There's technology now that is in voice detection software that supposedly, and it's still debate whether it's very valid, but being able to hear your voice producing a sound, detect by the quality of the sound that your voice is producing what ailments might be present in you. And it doesn't just sound like complete, pseudoscience nonsense to me, in the fact that, have you ever called your mom on the phone and she cuts you off in the middle of it? It's like, you sound kind of sick, or something's going, are you okay?
Yeah.
And, it's just like, she is so attuned to your voice, the healthy voice, and also the voice that's off. And sometimes they're even right, you're stuffy, or there's something going on, but there's voice detection software that says okay, we can detect there's something going on in your kidneys, or something, respiratory, or, something else going on just by the quality of the sound that you're able to produce in the specific health that you're in, or condition that you're in.
Wow. So I've heard of that, but I hadn't heard it explained like that. So thanks for enlightening me there. Yeah, man, that sounds amazing, and I'm sure it's like you intuitively feel. You just explained that it's right. That there's truth to it. So that's amazing if they can do that. I'll look into that a bit more. But there's examples of this in ancient culture. I'm not sure if you're aware of the healing chambers in Saqqara in Egypt. Have you looked into any of that?
Yes, there's, when I was doing Psychedelica, I was looking into, there's a few others now I'm not remembering, but I think in Greece, maybe Italy, there's underground catacombs all the way to South America, the Chavin ruins. There seems to be a lot of cultures that use underground chambers with limestone and different kinds of minerals that resonate, that allow for just auditory hallucinations, even all the way to healing. And some of the oldest stuff that I found coming from Ukraine and ancient Arata, in the underground grottos and caves, they would take you down there, they would sing for a woman that's either giving birth or somebody who's sick, they would take you down into these chambers, and in a sense, it's almost like sound healing. At least that was their premise of it.
Yeah, so that's amazing. And with the example of Saqqara as Dr. I think it's a Egyptian archaeologist.
How do you spell Saqqara?
Saqqara, I think it's Saqara, Arra. I think that's how you spell it. It's an Egyptian archaeologist named Abdel Hakim. He is like an indigenous elder of the place, and he's dedicated his life to understanding the ancient architecture and everything. He talks about the stories that he was given from his ancestors, like his grandfather and his ancestors that survived, and he says that the chambers were used for as a hospital, and there's like a big stone quartz table that he says the patient would choose which level. It's like stepped. They would choose which level they stand on intuitively, and then that is linked to a chamber down underneath, which then the physician would run down and put his head in this niche and be able to listen to the change in frequency of the patient on the table. That's kind of how he says that it works. There's no science to understand how it works, but it's just, I think it's a really fascinating story of possibly using sound for healing.
Well, and also using the dudes. Well, it's probably more than just dudes, but like using their intuition. Like you pick which one you stand on. Use your intuition. Yes. I find that fascinating. And I mean, if we're just going to look at that and say like, yeah, I don't know if I believe it, or I don't know if I believe that it works. Take a look at the fact that in Chichen Itza at the main temple, I did this on December 21st, 2012, stood at the base of that temple and clapped, and the sound would echo off of the temple back to me in the sound of the Quetzal bird, their national bird. And so you clap at the base of that, and it will come back to you. And this isn't the only temple that has done this kind of thing with sound, but it's alarming how similar the sound of the clap coming back at you sounds to the Quetzal bird, which are the birds that they have down there. Now, tell me any architect today that's doing something similar to that, and especially building something that, hundreds, if not maybe 1,000 years later, is still standing and operating the same exact way. I think that's fascinating. So it would not surprise me whatsoever what you just said about Saqqara in Egypt.
Yeah, and what you picked out the intuitive part of that, and which I think that is the most fascinating part as well. It's like you intuitively know what's wrong with you, but it's just the brain that gets in the way of like your actual knowledge. Yeah. And so if you just intuitively walk onto the platform, then it's informing the physician of, okay, then it's somewhere to do. I imagine this is how it works. It's in this part of the body, and then listening to that part of the body for, the kidney or whatever. The kidney's out of tune, whatever. So yeah, it's amazing.
I think that's fascinating, and I wanna talk more about the ancients. Eventually, I want to get back to sound healing, music, medicine. But now that we touched upon the ancients, I kind of want to riff a little bit on that. The sound is a creative force, according to the ancients. Like, what have you found in your studies? What kinds of cultures? What were they finding about sound as a creative force? How did they use it, and how did that show up in the artifacts that are left behind?
So sound is well documented through a lot, like most ancient cultures. It's like a pivotal, it's like a pillar of their societal organization, and it's also a pillar of their spiritual beliefs and traditions. So, you can see they reference sound as a creative force in the Vedic ancient Hindu texts, in the Sufi texts. The Australian Aboriginals have a rich idea of sound. Ancient Egyptians, Hermeticism. The Bible even references the word as being the creative force. So it's just such a common theme that I couldn't ignore it when understanding all this kind of stuff. But the most common is right, in the Vedic scriptures. And I believe what they were describing with is is vibration. So they say sound, but I believe what they're actually referencing is vibration, which is the oscillation and pulsation of all waveforms, or we use waveforms again, but all spherical bubbles to be correct, right?
Yeah.
That is the life force, that is the movement, the oscillation of electromagnetism and sound too.
Mm-hmm. And the original understanding of Ohm wasn't just OM the way that we typically produce it.
No, it's AUM.
AUM. And
yeah.
And what's interesting about that is that's almost a complete. It's not as sophisticated as going through every kind of mouth shape you can make to produce a sound. And as a singer, you know, you resonate nasally, you resonate in the throat, and you resonate in the chest.
Mm-hmm.
And even if you think about that, that's moving it up and down this portion of the spine. But Tibetan and Mongolian throat singers, they have a way of vibrating at resonating in two different chambers at the same time, and also with the mouth, like producing the higher overtones with the shape of the mouth, which is interesting.
Yeah.
So, but Aum, the way that they would do it, what seems to me is an overview of like all the fundamental frequencies, if you will. Yeah. And then the closed mouth one. So there was that, I'm forgetting the name of the author, but he wrote the book Breathe. He wrote in there, and it was the first time that I'd heard it, but I'd heard several other people mention it. He'd been on Rogan Experience, but he talks about in that book that humming with your mouth closed. And I know you had a video with talking about Jonathan Goldman, who I interviewed for Psychedelica.
Yeah, cool.
The art or the science or something of humming. And he talked about that on the show. But closed mouth humming produces 15 times more nitric oxide from the nasal cavity than you just naturally produce. So that's like a hack. If you want to produce more nitric oxide, which is a vasodilator, allows for oxygen and nutrients to go through your capillaries more efficiently, close your mouth and hum. Do some humming exercises, and you're producing 15 times more nitric oxide. So now pair that with the fact that in a dimly lit whatever, you have like candles, which also have their own kind of odd flicker rating. Maybe you're looking at a deity, you know, an image, whether it be Buddhist or Hindu or whatever, and then you're doing these quicker inhalations, sympathetic nervous system, and then these long exhalations, vocalizing, and then closing your mouth, releasing more nitric oxide for a long period of time. With that long exhalation is the parasympathetic. Of course, it's going to put you in an altered state of consciousness. And what's interesting is it's cymatics in the brain. You're just producing this by choosing to vocalize over and over. And then sometimes different words, there's sacred words and, you know, sacred names that you chant over and over again. I mean, this is fascinating to me. And I wonder if one day we're going to get to the point where some of these ancient languages will actually see that there was a deeper science than just they just randomly came up with a word for that and they called it sacred. I'm skeptical of that oversimplification that our ancestors were just, you know, barbarians or savage, and they just need to make a grunting noise to define something, and that's all these words, that's all the ancient languages have to do. And then I start thinking like, well, even if it was, then over thousands of years, we've entrained ourselves down through the generations. We've used these same sounds, and every major epiphany that I've heard somebody coming back from an altered state with, they usually say it's like that felt new, but it also felt like a memory. Like I remembered something, like a deeper truth about myself, which who knows, could have some epigenetic, you know, standing to, you know, I don't know what you have to say about that, but I'm definitely curious on your thoughts on the whole bridging between using sound, using frequency, and healing thyself, you know, use sound medicine.
Yeah. So the humming that you were referring to is called the humming effect. And that's what Jonathan Goldman wrote a book called The Humming Effect. And it's like basically all the research he did into like how that affects the physiology. And yeah, they found that the vibration, like creating the vibration in the nasal cavity is, yes, you produce more nitric oxide by nasal breathing, but you produce a lot more in combination with the hum, which is really interesting. Also, they found that they say that you can vagal tone the vagus nerve, wraps around. If anyone knows what the vagus nerve is like the largest nerve in your body, and it's responsible for like sort of mediating all of your functions, especially stress, like inflammation, the heart rate, like all that kind of stuff. So it wraps around the back of the larynx. It's got like this little hook. So you're able to vibrate the vagus nerve directly, which is having higher vagal tone means that you're able to recover from stress a lot quicker. So there's stuff about that too, which seems to be really interesting. And personally, like I've been practicing conscious humming a lot since I've like understanding it, and it really does calm me down. Like because I surf a lot here in Australia, and sometimes you're out in the waves and it's big, like the surf's big and it's like quite scary. And I'll sit there looking like a Fruit Loop, humming like at a low tone, and I notice that it really calms me down. So yeah, that's just my own experience of that, and I do it all the time because I tend to think too much. But yeah,
we're a culture of thinking too much.
Yeah.
You know what's interesting? The vagus nerve is the only cranial nerve that wanders outside of the spinal column. That's why they call it vagal or vagus nerve, vagabond. It wanders
wandering
through the body. It's also the reason why paraplegic and quadriplegics, primarily women, can still have orgasm, right? They don't have sensation, but they can still have orgasm because of the vagus nerve.
Wow.
God bless it.
Yeah, and things like splashing cold water on your face can increase vagal tone. There's a lot of mystery around it, but that is very interesting. Just the science of humming, or the humming effect, can have that effect. I kind of want to get a little bit weirder now.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things that you also have on your page is to Estos Tone, a beautiful musician, is Levitating Water Droplets. Gordon, see if you could find that. It's on Fundamental Frequency Instagram. It should be down there, but it's you've probably seen it before. There's this guy just dropping little water droplets above a speaker. There you go. Yeah. And I mean, I'm also assuming that these are because of the frequency where these water droplets are allowed to hover. They only hover at these intervals, correct?
Yes, that's right. So I'd love to say that the Estos Tone music was creating the levitation, but it's just the music from Instagram over the top. Yeah. If anyone knows,
I knew it wasn't Estos Tone. I knew it was a stable frequency. Yeah, but I know Estos. I know Estos. He probably could do that with his mind.
I'm sure he could. He's amazing. I love his music. And so yeah, what's happening there is that you've got two speakers like sort of opposite each other, and they're playing a frequency. They're playing the same frequency basically into each other. So you've got these overlapping waves, vertically. And then in those cancellation points where the waves overlap, you're able to place, there's enough high intensity air pressure that you're able to place droplets of water and they levitate. Yeah.
That's incredible. So the weirdness I wanted to get into, we were talking a little bit beforehand, and you can share your story if you want. We were talking about UFOs, even on the last podcast with Sean McCormick, and he was talking about his experiences, just things that he's noticed. And then we got into the conversation, because for me, I kind of feel like going back to the ancients, you did this, I don't want to jump all over the place, but you did this awesome video that turned me on to Dr. Jarl, who I think it was the early 1900s. He went to Tibet. I forget what to study in particular, longevity maybe.
Yeah, so he was a physician. He was actually a doctor, and he was studying at it was one of the big Ivy League universities. It was either Harvard or Princeton or something like that. And there was another Tibetan monk there who was also studying, and he became friends with this monk. This is the story. Became friends with this monk, and then they parted ways. And then years later, this monk reached back out to him again and said, "Hey, our High Lama is really ill, and he wants a physician to come and see him." So they got Joel. He got Joel to come over, knowing him. So he was there for months, apparently, and got to see a lot of things that most, outsiders wouldn't see. He got to be involved with their way of life, all of their rituals, all of that kind of stuff. And then one day they took him down to a site where they were building another stone wall as part of the monastery complex. And they had all these instruments lined up in this big arc around these big stones. And what he witnessed was these monks all get into arrangement. They started chanting, they started playing these huge horns and banging these drums. And the stone started to, after about 4 to 5 minutes, the stone started to wobble and become weightless. And then all of a sudden it lifted up and just placed itself on top of the structure that they were building. So that's the story. We can't, are we talking about, we can't find any books that say that it's, that give a very detailed description from Joel. There's, that it gets into conspiracy. Like when he came back, he apparently he took footage and he wrote notes in his book, and they were confiscated by the whatever company or society he was a part of. So yeah, it gets into that sort of realm. But yeah, man, it's a really interesting story.
Yeah, I don't buy it because I don't buy cover-ups. I don't think that there are agencies out there that like to hide information. I think that's all a bunch of hooey. Yeah. But to stay on point, I mean, there's a lot of speculation about how the pyramids were built, to what specification. Even the walls down in, I mean, there's walls like this, but down in, I forget the name, down in Peru, where it seems like the rock bent and curved around the side, and you can't even stick like a knife blade in between these rocks. And you ask, like, how did they produce that? Some say, like, plant matter softened it and they were allowed to make these walls that are earthquake proof and stuff like that. Without going down that rabbit hole, there's a lot of speculation about how sound might have been a factor in how some of the ancient architecture was built. With that being said, from that line of thinking, there are a lot of people who believe that if you believe in otherworldly UFOs, UAPs, things that we at least can't identify with conventional wisdom and information, how do these crafts or phenomena that we see in the skies move the way that they do? Sometimes accelerating in ways that, by modern propulsion and physics, we just don't have explanations for. Yeah. And so I'm always curious, like when I see things like, I think hover devices, when I see what we just showed from your page about those water droplets hovering there. Yeah. And also curious about, like, I don't know, like I don't want to go way off the rails, but you hear about bees. They have wings that are too small for their body to fly, yet they defy that logic, and they still do it. And some say it's because of a frequency that they produce around them. I don't know, but I want to get your thoughts on that, and let's talk about UFOs.
Okay, cool. Yeah. That was a gentle segue. I liked it. Yeah, you could say, look, I've had an interesting experience with UFOs. Like a few friends and I, we have some sacred Aboriginal sites around here that we like to frequent because they're beautiful. They're deep in the nature around here, and you can do a lovely bushwalk there. It's just something special about the area. You can feel the energy of the area. It's hard to explain with English language, right? So we like to go there and check it out and hang out and pay our respects to the elders of the land. And we did this on the equinox this year because we are certain that it's a ley line, just because we can feel the change in energy there. We were like, okay, let's go there in the equinox. There's meant to be a focused amount of electromagnetic energy in those areas, on ley line areas. That's what scientists have been able to read that off of using instrumentation on sacred sites. They're able to see that on these set days of the year, like the equinoxes and the solstices, there's a focused amount of electromagnetic energy from the sun in those areas. So we were like, oh, cool, let's go hang out there and do our own little ceremony. So we were doing it as the sun went down and as the moon was rising. It was a full moon as well. And then, out of the corner of our eye, we just started seeing these orbs just like slowly moving around up in the corner of the sky. And they were there for long enough, and they didn't move like a satellite or anything like that. They're a lot closer. They moved around slowly, and not in an like orderly fashion. They were kind of like tracking back and forth and moving up and down. So we have no way of describing what that was other than a UFO.
Have you talked with Aboriginals about stuff like this? Because I've hung out in Australia a number of times and hung out with some Aboriginals. I never got into these topics, but I would just imagine that maybe they don't share openly, but have you talked about any of this kind of stuff with Aboriginals, which I like to call originals?
They're the originals. I haven't. I would love to. What's interesting and kind of sad is there's actually like a real conflict going on with the Aboriginal tribes around where I live. Whereas everyone's found out that one of the Aboriginal tribes that we've been saying is the keepers of our area is actually a corporate entity. It's really funny. Like we found that this tribe was set up as like the political sort of like mouthpiece for this area. It's not the actual tribe that was from this area.
Wow.
And there's all this stuff going on because the original tribe. So this site that I was talking about, right, is one that's like under a lot of conflict at the moment here where I live, where the original tribe is saying, hey, it needs to be protected. And then this tribe that is claiming is the keeper of the land, but is also a corporate entity, is trying to sell it to build a high rise, to build like apartments. So it's just so clear that like there is this corruption that goes on, right? They're so crafty. Wow. I'm getting a bit off track from what you originally said, but yeah, man, I haven't spoken to any Aboriginals. I would love to, but it's like kind of a bit hard to get. It's hard to get to them. I'm sure I will one day. Absolutely love to talk to them. But to add to that story a little bit more about that UFO alien side of things, there is this site as well. There's this huge rock formation at this site, and there's this like crack between two big stones that goes up. Like you imagine like just like a big crevice, and you can climb up into it and walk in the middle of it. And in the middle of it, there's about an 8-foot wall, and it's about like 10 feet long, and it is completely full of Egyptian hieroglyphs.
What's the name of the rock?
It's called the Gosford glyphs, GOSFORD. Glyphs, that's what everyone names it. There's people from Sydney University that have studied it and stuff, and there's a lot of like confusion around. People say, oh, it's just like World War II veterans came back from Egypt and started carving it and all this kind of thing, but the glyphs are so perfect, and they're so deeply like into the rock. It's
they're really engraved in there.
It's fascinating, man. We go there all the time because it's just like mesmerizing, and it might have been carved by somebody, but Egyptian, there's been a few guys who study Egyptology and study hieroglyphs, and they've like translated parts of it. There's some conflicting ideas about what it actually says. Some say that it tells a story of aliens coming down and like inhabiting the area and giving information to the Aboriginal elders. And then other people say it's the story of Egyptians coming to Australia and traveling here via boat, and then they had a shipwreck. And there's like another story where there's a few different interpretations of this, right? But there's another one that says that these explorers came here to find this land because they'd heard about the Aboriginal people here and their wisdom, and then they put this story onto the rock to say this is where we're from. And
this looks like a UFO. This one right here. I was
just gonna say,
this one is pretty like, all right, what is?
There's a lot.
That
looks
looks straight up like
hey.
And then obviously the pharaohs. That's very spot on from Egypt. Seeing the pharaoh iconography.
One of them's a cartouche apparently. One of them's the cartouche of Khufu, which is really interesting. I don't know. I'm not a hieroglyphics expert. I'm not a Egyptologist, but this is what I've been told by people who study this stuff.
That's amazing. And that's how far from you?
About 20 minutes. Yeah.
Man.
Yeah, man. If you ever come out here, I'll take you there.
Dude, I would love to. That's an interesting one right there. Obviously, that's a sticker on it, but
Is it a mushroom or?
that's an ancient sticker. No,
Yeah,
I mean, it looks
or
like an eye on top
UFO.
of a pyramid.
Yeah.
Yeah,
this is
it's
the one
interesting
that
as well
I-
because you can see there's some that have there's fake ones as well that
Maybe
people
it's
have
a
tried to
hut,
add,
too.
and
Yeah.
they're really shit in comparison to the other ones. Like they're not
Right.
deep, like they're not like
It's like,
perfect. They're
it's like
very
the fake crop
lazy.
circles.
Yeah, man. Yeah. So anyway, I have no idea what it is, but it's very interesting.
Yeah.
Dude, that is
Very cool.
fascinating. There was one other thing that I really want to make sure that we got to is sonopuncture. I saw
Yeah.
this on your page. So, like, people should be familiar with acupuncture, acupressure, the meridian charts. I've talked about and I've nerded out on fascia in the past, and the fascial trains in the body, they run in very specific sequences. And it turns out by some people's estimations, anywhere from 80 to 95% accuracy between the fascial trains and the meridian chart. But
Yeah.
sonopuncture.
Yeah.
So explain that.
So sonopuncture is basically acupuncture, but it's using the sound pressure from tuning forks instead of acupressure. It was actually invented in the 80s by a acupuncturist. I forget her name, but she was trying to treat AIDS patients, and she couldn't come in contact with them, so she developed another way of helping them, which is really beautiful. So yeah, it acts exactly like acupuncture. Apparently, it has the same sort of outcomes and effects, and you are placing the vibration of tuning forks on different meridians and trigger points. Yeah,
That's incredible. You know, I've heard, and I don't think this is an exact one-to-one correlation, but I've heard, if you're familiar with myofascial release, it's
Yeah.
just the fact that you get stuck in certain parts of your fascia that radiates and augments the symmetry of the body. If you're
Yes.
like stuck over here or stuck down here under the arm, that can radiate into facial dysmorphia, all kinds of things.
yeah,
And the interesting thing is that myofascial release, there's some myofascial release that you can only do by pressing in and holding for a while. There's others that literally they will not. Yeah, it's by tapping and thumping. That's
Yeah,
the only
yeah.
way to release it. And this, I've always looked at acupuncture as being micro myofascial release. It's like
Yes.
very, very precise into these storage spots that are typically blocked. Like if you're going to
Yeah.
have a blockage, if you hit these points, you're more than likely going to have some kind of an effect because these are where almost all blockages coalesce. And so doing that with a tuning fork sounds the same to me, you know, and there is science. James Oshman has looked at it and says that even your fascia in movement, mechanical movement, the stretching, and fascia actually doesn't stretch. It just, it moves and it glides along itself, but it
Yes.
produces audible sound. If you were to amplify it, it's in the audible range as well, which is
Wow.
interesting because the tuning forks, you put that there, and it's almost like what we were talking about before. You're reminding the body what it should sound like, and maybe it has to let go of the charge or whatever's being held there. It has to let go once it's reminded of that original frequency. I'm just kind of
Yeah.
riffing on it, but I find that really interesting, and I kind of want to try sonopuncture now.
Yeah, I would. I actually haven't tried sonopuncture. I can't find anyone around where I live that does it. I'd like to just maybe try it on myself, but we have lots of acupuncturists. But to comment on the fascia and everything that you were talking about, I remember hearing you talk about how the fascia is like a fiber optic type construction, and it's obviously transporting information based on how traumas and experiences get trapped in the body. But I think the fascia is like the first point of call in the physical, because there seems to be, well, we know there is a relationship between where our memories are stored and they're actually stored in our magnetic field around us. And so it's kind of like just the reference point to a place in the field.
Yeah.
And to explain this a bit better, we can talk about biofield tuning, which is another modality that uses tuning forks, and it was developed by Eileen Day McCusick. which I think is the most comprehensive form of sound healing. It's the first one that actually maps out locations in the magnetic field, in the biofield as it's called, of places where there's like a chronological time. So the biofield emanates out from the body 6 feet in all directions, and it's in the shape of a torus. And so on the edges of the field is your earliest memories, right?
Yeah.
So. Yeah. And then the basis of it is that you take the tuning fork and use the sound pressure of the tuning fork, and you comb through the field until you find stuck clusters of energy, as she refers to noise, like signal to noise ratio. So there's distortion in the field, which seems to be related to certain experiences to do with certain people in our life as well. She can pinpoint exactly the sound. You monitor the sound of the tuning fork to hear if it changes in pitch, and she can tell that this pitch is fear or anxiety, and it's in this zone, which is related to your age of about 18, and it's related to the mother. Like she can get that specific, and she can repeat it over and over again, and she's got hundreds and hundreds of clinical evidence to suggest that that's how it works, and it's the same for everybody.
I've heard her in a podcast. She was saying how think of it like hair. At the end of your hair, it's the oldest, meaning like it came from when you were younger. Yes. And it grows out in that fashion. I remember that because somebody asked her, almost like tree rings. And she was like, I used to use that analogy until I realized that tree rings don't grow outward from the center like we think. But I found that fascinating because the biofield and there being a field outside of us that stores some of our memories. This ties in with Rupert Sheldrake's work on
the morphic field.
The morphic field, and also where memories come from, because he laid out it was either Science Set Free. I'm not sure exactly what book it was in, but there were children that were born with only a partial brain. I think there was this one child that was born with not even half of a brain, and the rest was just fluid, amniotic fluid, or cerebrospinal fluid, which in utero is the amniotic fluid that, invaginates, they say, like, and folds into your cerebrospinal fluid. And the interesting thing about that is this kid went on to college, graduated college, right? Went on to got a degree, went on to hold down a job. And like people were like, where is the memory being stored? Where is it being stored? And he's saying like, there is this field, there's this morphic field. It's the same thing. If you cut the arm off of a gecko or something like that, it just goes back to its original blueprint, which is in the field around it, and it grows it back. So I definitely find that fascinating that we each have our own field around us. So that's one of the most interesting fields of study that I think we haven't even scratched the surface of.
Yeah, and it speaks to as well, you're talking about the geckos or the salamanders and stuff that can grow their limbs back. What is phantom pain? When people have amputees lose limbs, like war veterans and stuff, and they can still feel their limb there. There's a memory of the limb that is stored somewhere else. It's very clear that the brain doesn't store memories or as much information as what we think. It's a receiver for information that's in the field, it seems. The body is electric. You can't have electricity without magnetism. And so the electric pulses inside the body, you can measure brain activity is electric. The heart uses electricity to pulse. Your cells, you can measure the voltage of cells. It's clear. The electric universe guys, I don't know if you've looked into electric universe theory very much. Walt Thornhill and the electric universe guys talk about cell voltage being the key to cell health. But again, that's another frequency thing. It's super fascinating. Yeah, so it makes sense. We can see sound affects electromagnetism, right? We can see it arranging matter, and at the subatomic level, matter is just electromagnetic relationships. So it makes complete sense that you would have electromagnetism, stored memories or stored events out in the field, and you can realign it with sound using sound pressure.
Last thing I want to ask, your thoughts on how big of a threat things like telecommunications infrastructure you know, cell towers and stuff like that, balanced with what we can do to just empower ourselves. You can take certain things back into your own control, almost like sonic sovereignty. I'm curious your thoughts on that. Like, you know, we are living in a world where our grandparents had 100 at the very least, and this was as of 2011, 2010, 100 million times more electromagnetic interference or frequencies in our ambient environment today as opposed to our grandparents. However, you know, I try not to be an alarmist in that respect, because I also think we are magnificent creatures that have like found ways to get past obstacles of any category. So your thoughts on just this new technological era that we're in, and you know, what are your thoughts on that? Keeping some kind of sovereignty of our sonic field around us by either intention or whatever.
So, yeah, look, I don't want to be super negative about it either, but it is a problem. We're being penetrated by all this electromagnetic smog, they call it, constantly, and it's just getting more and more intense. Like you were saying, that was a really good statistic that you gave about our, 100 years ago opposed to now. Yeah, it is affecting the body. It's permeating the body, and it's we see how waves and electromagnetism have an effect on our physiology. Of course, it's affecting our physiology. To what extent, we're not sure. But a lot of people will report that they feel bad if they're near a cell tower. They're experiencing like low energy or brain fog, or just like, flu-like symptoms, all sorts of things. There's also like, I haven't seen heaps and heaps of research about it, but there is research that suggests that it's superheating the water in the cells, and it's distorting the way the DNA communicates and all that kind of stuff. I don't doubt that it is distorting us. Absolutely. But, I will lead with a bit of, I'll leave that with it. We can do something about it. There is technology that says it can change and make the frequencies more harmonious in our environment. I don't know if you've looked into biogeometry before, which is Dr. Ibrahim Karim. Yeah. Yeah. So his stuff is incredible. And if you understand anything about physics and, frequency, I urge you to read his book or listen to a podcast with him. I think Paul Chek has a good podcast with him. Paul Chek has
a 3-hour podcast. I think he even just did another one.
Yeah.
Phenomenal. Going back to the, Goethe quote, music is liquid architecture and architecture is frozen music. Talk about biogeometry. I have a friend in upstate New York that's building a house according to biogeometry. This shit is phenomenal. It's for real.
Architecture is just a collection of geometry, right? It's a harmonious collection of geometry, and music is a harmonious collection of frequencies, and they're one in the same thing. One is just like a material manifestation. So that's why you see so many like beautiful temples being built in. My favorite ones are like the mosques in like Turkey and stuff. Like you get like the beautiful geometric. They look like DMT trips and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. But also like they're ancients. John Anthony West sort of blew the lid off that because he looked at the Luxor temple and how it was built, and he found it was built completely in harmony with the way the human form grows, like with Fibonacci and all that kind of stuff. Wow. But the thing that Dr. Ibrahim Karim is getting at is that every structure has its own frequency set, and so certain geometric shapes emit a frequency that can influence the environment. So with biogeometry, like without getting too deep into it, because it's like I could do a 3-hour podcast on biogeometry, basically certain geometric shapes are able to harmonize your environment. So he has this cube, which is like, it has this cube with certain geometric patterns on it and stuff, which I think it's like 4,000 square meters it will cover, and it will harmonize all of the frequencies in that area. It doesn't get rid of the frequencies, it makes them harmonious. And like the body is able to exist within it. I have his biogeometry stuff, his L90 stickers on the windows of my house and everything, because I'm always in electromagnetic smog. I sit at a computer, I work with the computer constantly. So yeah, and I did notice it was affecting my health.
I think you probably noted the number one solution to all of that, because even my phone, on the back of it, my friend who actually is building his house, according to this, even color and, on certain spots, color and shape, they have a certain quality to it. And sometimes the simplest fixes actually have a balancing effect. Just to be sure, the sun is giving off massive amounts of radiation. The difference between that and a router is the sun is a balanced signal. The router is not a balanced signal. So what we're talking about here is biogeometry is just balancing and harmonizing those signals that are just there. They're in our environment. And
yeah, I think as well, like, it's important to note that like people trust these scientists that are and these technologists that are coming up with these inventions, that they've got our best interests at heart. It's not true. They're just creating a product that they can sell. Walt Thornhill, who's the electric universe theory guy, he's another Australian actually. He says we don't have scientists anymore. We have technologists, and we have technicians that just do what corporations tell them, right? So, and
industry, come on, like there's always a bias, and we don't have to say that they're all like they all have our worst interest in mind. We don't have to jump to that extreme. No. But let's just say that there's definitely, I won't get into it, but especially in the economy the way it is today, and nobody feels it's sustainable. There's this last ditch effort mentality that's like profit as much as you can before the empire collapses. So,
let me go to Mars.
It's a great sound business model right there.
Yeah. Baby.
I guess the way that I want to kind of wrap this up is there are things that we can do, and there are people like Dr. Ibrahim Karim, Daraya, his daughter, the whole wealth of information you can get. I was just talking to Kimba Aram. She did, I wish I could remember the Gaia show. It's on frequencies. It's all about sound frequencies.
Is it Sound of Creation, the new one?
It's Sound of Creation, yeah. And I don't even know if she interviewed him. She should have, but she told me just a few days ago she went through the entire biogeometry course. And so I definitely think that's something that I want to get into. And I feel like this is something in the world that we're getting into today, we need to understand a little bit deeper that there are solutions out there. So we don't just get into this finger pointing, that the only thing we can do is, raise the alarm bell and just get into finger pointing. I think there's more that we can do. We can get intelligent about it. It doesn't stop all of the effects of it. But I mean, if you think about it, Ibrahim found out that pyramids that are flat on each side are dehydrating. But those pyramids that you just saw, they actually are more 8-sided. If you see the sun on the side of them, there's actually a divot in the center of each plane, each side of it. And if you see it from the side, you'll see that it's almost like 8-sided in a sense. And there's something about that shape that is not dehydrating and it's energizing. So you imagine if our ancestors, if these ancients understood sound to at least the same level as Ibrahim Karim, then you'll come to understand that they were doing this not just for humanity, they were doing this for the surrounding nature. Now, I can't say why we have a desert around around Egypt when it looks like, according to the Sphinx, that it might have been a lot more lush with a lot more rainfall. I can't speak to that, but I do think that there are solutions. So I at least want to wrap on that note that there are things we can do, take into our own solutions we can take into our own hands. And I want to let the audience know, let us know what you have going on, what you see on the horizon for you, what you're looking to build and create.
Yeah, well, Yeah, just to touch on Dr. Ibrahim Karim, what you were saying, his description of the creation of the universe is amazing as well. I highly recommend looking at his stuff and buying some of his products. It's amazing. He really understands the way temples were built. Anyway, I'll leave it at that. But yeah, so there is a lot of hope, man. There's absolutely hope that we can learn to work with these frequencies. This is what the ancients were desperately like screaming at us, but like there is a way to live harmoniously with our surrounding environment without destroying it and ourselves. We just have to listen, you know. Dr. Ibrahim Karim, again, he solved a huge issue in Switzerland. They got him to go there. There was a massive problem with 5G or some sort of cell tower radiation in the area.
It was 5G on a church.
Yeah, and it was like causing like problems with the animals and the people in the area, and so they got him to go and basically neutralize it, and everything returned to normal. It was absolutely incredible. But so the Swiss government came to him about that. So
yeah, he did it in one town, and then it was such a profound effect to even the skeptics that thought it was a bunch of hooey. Yeah. That they were like, come back and do it for the entire country. But now the telecom companies, they don't want to be liable. So we can't claim that you've fixed their error. So what you have to do is you can't touch their towers. You have to fix the effect without touching the cause. And he was like, okay. And he did it.
How did you say it?
Yeah, because, and it's right, because like I was saying, the cube structure that he uses neutralizes, you're meant to put it centrally in your house, but it neutralizes the whole area for 4,000 square meters or something, which is incredible. So everyone should have one in their home. What have I got coming up? So if anyone wants to like get in contact with me, I'm on Instagram the most, which is my handle is at fundamental_frequency_, or you can just look up Lewis Parker. It's Louis spelled as well. Yeah, man, like my dream is I'm a musician and an artist first and foremost, and that's what I want to be in the world. So I'm working on creating music that adheres to the principles of sound therapy, so that we have like a more harmonious and harmonious frequencies to listen to, rather than, you know, I think we can't say that all the music before is harmful, because it's not. But we can say that it's created largely unconsciously. I think we're coming into a realm now where we're taking responsibility for ourselves and for our environment and for the larger responsibility that is unseen, our immaterial aspect. So yeah, man, it's about just being intentional about making music, implementing some sound healing therapy modalities like Eileen McCusick. You know, you're creating music, you're playing it to people, it's definitely affecting their fields. So yeah, I want to be intentional about that. And so I'm working on a project at the moment, and I'll have music out soon, and I'll start playing live streaming shows and things. So absolutely stay tuned for that. But if you want to reach out to me as well, you can go to lewisparkersound.com, and you can email me. But mainly Instagram. I have TikTok as well, which I'm trying to build up. But yeah.
Beautiful. Yo, Lewis, I just have to say this was an absolute pleasure, man. I've been following you for a while. It's cool to actually have this kind of a conversation with you and go deep.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Ben. I really respect you as a person in this area, and I'm very much look up to you. So thanks so much, bro. It's been an absolute honor.
Right on. Ladies and gentlemen, Lewis Parker, that was incredible. I'm not just blowing smoke when I say I've been following him for a while. There are a few of the videos that you'll find on his Instagram page, Fundamental Frequency, that are just, they're so short and digestible. They're scientific, yes, but they're not heady. They're not going to make you just scratch your head wondering what you just heard. It really shows that there is simplicity here to the power and the force and effect of sound, of music, and that it's a lot more accessible than we once gave it credit for. Please go and check out his work. We'll have all of his information. You can reach out to him. You can go check out his work in the show notes below. And just want to let you all know that every Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern, we are here on the Ben Stewart podcast. Every Monday, I put out a Waking Infinity News every Tuesday. If you go to benjosephstewart.com, sign up, become a member, you get access to a lot of free material that I put out weekly, awakening protocols, and deeper dives on the information that I put out in front of the paywall. This is all for you guys, and it's all information that is like what Lewis is talking about. It tries to be as uplifting as possible without ignoring that there are real threats out there, but we're not inept. We have power. We have the ability to step up and do something about it. And I think the number one thing we should do is start getting inspired. There's so much shit out there to get inspired by. So with that being said, I love you all, and I'll catch you all next time on the Ben Stewart Podcast.